Welcome, everyone, to CEO Table Talk. My name is JT O'Donnell. I'm the founder and CEO of Work It Daily and the host of today's show. Today, we're going to be talking with 4 Vistage chairs about driving revenue versus optimizing profitability. I think this is a hot topic. I can't wait to get their takes on this. As you know, they all lead and manage and coach a group of CEOs on this type of topic on a regular basis. So they have a lot in store for you today. So let's get into it. Welcome, chairs. Great to have you here.
Hey, JT.
Ready to be here.
Good afternoon.
So I know we're going to hear from all of you, but we're going to pick on Mark first because when we were talking before the show today, Mark said, I've got a bit of a contrarian view on this, which you know I'm all about that. So Mark, between the two, which do you prefer? Let's get into it.
Oh, for me, no doubt, you got to drive revenue, but I want to back up just a bit, and we'll all agree on this. Cash is life. Cash is the most important. So if we just acknowledge that and say everything going forward in this discussion says you got to have cash, but yeah, I'm a big believer in driving revenue. In fact, for me, optimizing profitability is almost a dirty word. I think as you grow your company, you need to put as much money as you can into sales, marketing, and infrastructure, anything that supports revenue. It's not that you shouldn't manage your expenses, but to optimize profitability. That when I hear that, I hear about companies cutting back on sales and marketing efforts or cutting back on employee development, which is great for the short term, but it's just terrible for the long-term survivability of the company. So yeah, drive revenue first, manage expenses, and be careful about optimizing profitability.
JT, I think you're on mute, but I'm going to jump in there if you don't mind. And Mark, I always appreciate your point of view, but I'm going to take the opposite side of that. And people who have worked with me know that I'm going to always ask about the profitability when the business development or sales team is saying we have to do this and we can't worry about that we're going to lose money on it up front. I'm going to push back and say we need to manage profitability up front because, like you, cost cutting to meet an objective, to meet shareholders' needs at the time of just before the board meeting is not good for anybody. We need to manage profitability up front. You need to drive revenue, or you're not going to grow. It really is part art, not all science when you're talking about balancing the two. I really think that we have to work in tandem on driving revenue and growth and managing profitability. But I have to say, you have to look at profitability right from the beginning and drive forward in the smart way so that you're not having to do cost cuts later.
Fascinating. All right. So far we're seeing more leans towards optimizing profitability. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm going to be right down the middle, but can I go give examples? So I'm a visual learner, so it'd be okay if I gave some examples of how this might play out, both managing the cost, but also driving the revenue. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
All right. So a couple examples. So we did business years ago with Hallmark and a lot of specialty retailers. And at the time, the company was going to cut costs in this particular part of our business because they said, hey, that channel is not profitable anymore. We're going to stop investing in it and so on. So I always ask people, ask the extra question because yes, on the surface, that was true. If you look at a P&L, that was what was happening. But if you ask the extra question, which means going out to the customer and trying to decide what's going on, what we learned was that the customer was moving our products in there. This was a retail store at the time, into an area that actually slowed the sell-through of the product and didn't understand what makes the product sell very well. So we ended up moving the displays to the section of the store that actually made it sell better. And at the end of the day, what we learned was we could drive revenue, grow profit within this channel. And so we didn't cut expenses. We just optimized. And I know, Mark, you don't like that statement, but we did optimize our investment in this business and started getting it growing again. Another example was we had a client of ours who let's put it this way, the Russell Athletic was an apparel business that a lot of them are all small independent owners. Cash flow is a big issue, and I agree with Mark that cash is critical. And so they said, hey, could you have some of the inventory we buy from you available in a bigger way so we can just buy it at once, 24-hour turnaround time? What started out as 6 or 7 items across colors and sizes turned into about 1,000 items. So it became very inefficient. So immediately the company said, hey, Mike, now that you're in here, we got to cut expenses, we got to cut costs, cut the inventories. This program's a disaster. I said, hold on a sec, let's just ask the extra questions. We reached out to the clients and the key customers, and ironically, they're the ones that said, hey, can you cut this back to maybe the top 10 items? We don't need 1,000. Just stay in stock with those. And they literally took the catalog, they shrunk the thing down. Our sales team was screaming internally, thought we needed everything. The customer said, well, we really need this. Here's why. If you could do this, we could make this program work. Immediately, we reduced inventory, cut costs in the business, drove the turns, and converted the inventory much faster and started growing the business. And again, optimized our investment in that particular space. I think that the key is to continually keep asking the extra question and not be afraid to go check both with your own internal organization and your customer base as it relates to, hey, I need some help. I need some help. Here's what's happening. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised how effective that would be. And you can start doing both, I think, optimizing both.
I love it. I love the examples too. So, Kirsten, what's your take? What do you think? What else can you add to this? Agree, disagree?
I'm going to say neither. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. I think everybody has joined in on that a little bit today. All three are vitally important. Nobody has said differently today. But these three are all measures of things in business, similar to Mike's stories. All of these things in our companies require the attention of leaders. They need to answer the question, what has changed in the last 30 days in our market that alters our understanding of the future? They need to tell us the impact of, did we do what we said we were going to do last quarter in response to our understanding of the market? These things, profit, revenue, cash, they tell us what the numerical impact is of our leadership, of our decisions, of the contextual understanding we have of our business and its place in the market. Mike's stories are a perfect example of it depends.
All right. So we're going to talk now because I Silicon Valley, all right, you go out there and all anyone talks about is revenues, users. I don't hear anything ever about profitability. And now you see what's happening right now. Everyone's cutting, everyone's scrambling. Somebody walk me through what's happening in one of those companies right now. Like what conversations are they having when they were literally told, don't worry about it, just go get users and we'll figure out revenue. Nobody's been talking about profitability. What is happening right now?
I think that cycle goes up and down. When I was talking with private equity for my company, as I previously said, I like to drive revenue, so my profitability wasn't very good, and that was fine. That was fine for them, and my valuation was based on revenue, which frankly I think is just absolutely nuts. You can't buy a company on revenue yet. That cycle is happening right now. I don't know where it is on the cycle, but bottom line, profitability is the ultimate answer, and let the investors be smarter than me.
I love it. Okay.
But JT, I think the thing that's interesting, because I follow what you're describing pretty closely, and I look at all these tech companies, and the one that I really track is Tim Cook at Apple, because he's the one guy that's an operator versus a founder kind of led business. So you're right, a lot of these founders are just driving growth because that's what they know, that's what they were rewarded for. I think if you look at what Tim Cook has done, he's the only one of those major tech companies that hasn't announced huge layoffs, hasn't seen massive profits dropping, because I think he does a very good job. And this is back to what Kirsten was saying. It's both. I think as the pandemic was happening, he wasn't out there just hiring a whole bunch of people And I hear these arguments that, well, we're trying to grab as much talent as possible. That's why we did it. Well, that didn't make a lot of sense because now you got to lay them all off. And I think as I watch what's happening out there, I look for the really good operators that are also growing their business. And that's where I think Apple stands out. And I pay attention to what they're doing and how they're doing it. The other folks, I would say not all, Microsoft's pretty good, but a lot of them just hired a whole bunch of people thinking it's going to continue because they don't understand how to manage both. And so as I look at what's happening on Silicon Valley, I just pay attention to where Apple's going and what they're doing. And I think that's the smart way, no matter how small your business or how big it is, that's the way to operate. I think the thing that he's done more than the others is he has a pretty good handle on his data. He knows what works and what's not working. And I think that's a piece that I always go back to is, do we have the discipline as a business owner, even as a Vistage chair by myself? You got to have the self-discipline to say, what are the things happening in business? Can I give one example of that, just even as a Vistage chair?
Definitely.
When I first started, I was thinking, okay, I got a speaker coming. I'm going to buy a bunch of books for him. So I'm buying books. I'm buying all these notepads, all the things I had to spend money on. After a few months, I started saying, is this really the right way to go? I called out to speakers and they said, oh, I'll send you some free books. I'm like, oh my God, I spent I think it's just having that discipline to keep checking yourself and saying, where are you investing? Where are you spending? And just keep doing it. And I learned from watching my own experiences making those decisions, but also people like Tim Cook in a high profile business. And I think that's what helps me keep my balance of both revenue and expenses.
Love it.
I'd say Mike highlights. Oh, okay.
I think that you also have to think about your business, who you are. We talked last month about it, even during the CEO communications, is who are you? Why are you in this business? And is what you're doing consistent with your values and your mission? And for some companies, if they're just growing very quickly to be sold to a PE, that's going to be a different decision than a company that's growing to continue to build value for their customer and stay in business and be a legacy business. So I do think you have to stay true to the company you're trying to be.
I love that. Kirsten, what do you think?
I think Nora makes a great point, and I was going to just double click on something Mike alluded to, which is that communication across the individuals in the C-suite. Oftentimes there's a different way of communicating and thinking about your business from the CEO chair and strategy into the operations chair, thinking about what are we doing today? How are we doing it? Are we efficient? Right. And then your numbers chair or your accounting chair, your CFO chair. Oftentimes they're speaking different languages and asking different questions of the numbers. And if you're all on different pages, you're all going to get different answers out of those numbers. And I think that's a little bit of what you were suggesting earlier, which is why are these businesses going, off the rails instead of playing the long game, making the decisions for, the future that is happening, making contextual decisions and also evaluating their decisions using the numbers. And just like our last talk, I think it comes down to communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to comment that and say, as somebody who works with professionals out there, hundreds of thousands are losing their jobs. Those individuals do not understand the complex decisions that are happening up in that C-suite. And I love that you're unpacking that here today to help people understand it has a lot to do with where the business is and what the objectives are and what needs to be met. Instead, it now plays out in the media, with companies laying off thousands and thousands of people, and their explanation was, well, we were just hiring to hire. Can you imagine how a professional feels to find out that that was the business decision? So it is really fascinating. I love that you're bringing up the communication. I want to remind everyone that today we're here with a CEO Table Talk on the discussion of driving revenue versus optimizing profitability. I am so lucky to have 4 very accomplished Vistage chairs. These are CEO coaches. Please take a moment, jot their names down while I have them all on the screen, and make sure you go over and find and follow them here on LinkedIn, because they are sharing incredible knowledge. They are somebody you should be following on LinkedIn. And of course, if you decide to reach out to them, customize the connection request and let them know you saw them on CEO Table Talk. But team, I want to pivot because we've got a couple of really good questions here from the audience. This first one from Michael. Michael says, can a new market entrant or a disruptive competitor unravel your revenue planning? What do you think on that? Anyone? I'm going to start with you, Kirsten. Let's go backwards this time. What do you think?
Absolutely. One of the things that first came to mind as you were reading that question is what happens when a competitor comes into your market and solves a problem for your customer that you didn't know your customer had because you weren't communicating with that customer.
That's huge. Absolutely.
You're done.
Yep, definitely. Team, other thoughts? Mike?
I think though that back to that question though, we can't control events and we can't always control the outcome, but we can control how prepared we are.
Mhm.
And I think the reason people get disrupted is a lot because they're not prepared. They're not looking at all the things that are going on in their business. They're just sort of, this is what we do today. And then they react to it versus being very disciplined and thinking about what are some of the things going on. So Michael, yes, absolutely you can get disrupted, but I think when you're prepared, you have a better chance of offsetting whatever it is they're offering because you really understand your business well. And I think that's the biggest challenge, whether it's a one-person operator or thousands of employees. People get really complacent. And if you're not, you can protect yourself, I believe.
I agree.
I'd like to, JT, your question about Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is this really unique, in fact, sort of a strange part of the business world. And if you look at what Kirsten said about revenue is vanity, I think that is a reflection of this idea that you can have a winning business or a great business with revenue, and you can't. It has to be foundational work. And Michael's question pulls into it also. You can't disrupt plumbing. You can't disrupt construction. You can disrupt high technology, but there's so much business available, so much opportunity for new entrepreneurs to do what I would call boring, if it's okay, boring business. Just do it a little bit better than everyone else and you'll be just fine.
That's a fantastic point. There is so much out there, so much boring business out there that can make you a whole lot of money, right? And does good in the world. Nora, do you want to weigh in on this at all? What do you think?
Sure. Well, while my business background is in a fairly regulated area in government contracting and the satellite industry for many years, that led me to be more conservative, and I was definitely on the conservative side as far as how bold to be, and was always leery about people talking about disruption. Disruption happened on the technology side, but we also had to manage how we approached it. So if we're growing too fast on the revenue side, there's going to be costs associated with it. And how do we deal with that? I am definitely somebody that says you have to plan. While you can't plan for everything, you're much better off if you've been planning. The way I look at people that theoretically are lucky, they have planned well, and it looks like they're lucky as they go along, because when you've planned, then you have everybody in your organization is ready for what they need to do, even if they haven't thought of that specific scenario. If you've been planning, you're ready.
I love that. I love that. If you're planning, you look lucky. That's cool.
Yeah.
Every company needs a Nora in their organization, though. Someone who's always thinking about what could happen. And so gotta hire someone like Nora in your company.
What is it? They say a lack of planning is a plan to failure.
Yeah.
That's a good one. But there might be a couple people on the line today that used to remember me and be the one that was always pushing those hard questions, and they'd be like, everybody was a go, and there's Nora asking those questions.
Yeah.
But that's why we're having this conversation today.
Trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is why we have that conversation today for sure.
Yeah. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. So planning is pretty
That's
important.
Amazing. We've got a follow-up question from Michael. So I want to keep in theme with this. Can optimizing profitability erode the footprint of quality? I'm going to go to you, Mark, because you were the one that talked about optimizing profitability first. What do you think?
Yes, Michael, that is absolutely a perfect question with, in a sense, the answer is embedded. Yeah, of course. And that's what concerns me about the concept of optimizing profitability. Managing expenses, I think, is a different concept. But when you optimize profitability, too far, you cut too much, yeah, that is going to hurt quality. It's going to hurt the long-term culture of your organization. Yeah, and I'm all over that. Yep, don't erode quality by optimizing profitability. Never.
Mike, can I push back on that?
Yeah.
So what is the method that you would maintain your quality and optimize your profitability? So too often I've seen folks, stick with customers that force them into staying with them and actually sacrificing quality because they're trying to stick with all of their customers and not realizing that some customers are good for profit and for quality, and some customers are bad for profit and bad for quality. And, I agree with you that we don't want to push profit and sacrifice quality, but I disagree that it's the drive for profit that degrades quality. I think we can have a discipline in a company that says these are my quality metrics, and if I abide by those, I can push profit to wherever it can go and stay in line with my quality measures. And both are important. So I think it's an absence of measuring quality in a verifiable, reliable, and valid way that allows us to push profitability over it.
See, I go back. I think Kirsten's on to something there. Back to the
How do you say
communication.
that?
I think though that Kirsten, you're hitting on that back to that communication. I keep thinking about when you said that, it's so true.
Yeah.
Just a couple examples of this.
Yeah.
Back to this quality profitability question Michael had. Russell Athletic years ago decided to go on this profitability, trying to optimize stuff. And I joined the organization, went down to the plant. We had all these issues with screen printing and nobody could figure out, just customer complaints. And I went down to the plant, and the young man that was running the screen print operation, I was asked 3 questions. What are we doing really well? And the last one was, what can I do for you personally and professionally? And he said to me, and I won't use the words he used because they were 4-letter words, but he said, could you have us stop using this new ink that we're using? It's causing all these issues. And I said, excuse me? And he said, well, we're on this cost-cutting initiative, and it's destroying all of the quality of the screen printing we're doing. We literally had $1 million of inventory we couldn't use anymore because of screen printing. It all came down to we were saving 7 cents for each of the tubes, which amounted to $29,000 on a $120 million business, because they decided to go do this. All we had to do is ask the question of the person who's working it. We changed that, and all of a sudden it went up. That's just one example. The low end. The high end one I'll give you is we used to leave a chair open for our consumer. So Yankee Candle was a high-end brand, consumer-driven company. And in order to make sure we didn't erode the quality and to optimize the profit, because we were always faced with that business, we had a name for our consumer. And we left a chair in the room. For every meeting we had, left a chair in the room. And I think it was Amy, or I can't remember the name of what we gave the name of our consumer.
Elijah.
Every time this question popped up, are we going to optimize profitability, erode quality? We just said, what would she think?
Yeah.
And every time we asked that, we could then go back to our customer and say, look, we're going to make a choice where we are because of this. And I got to tell you, back to the communication, I'm going to keep harping on that, Kirsten, right on the money.
Yep.
We would talk to the client. They go, oh, okay, that makes so much sense. We understand. We're right there with you. How do I think you can do both. You just have to be able to communicate across internal the company and externally with your clients.
Yeah.
Good question, Michael.
Well, and,
Great question.
and I agree with both of you, and I understand, Mark, where you're coming from. I don't mean to sound like I'm always giving you a hard time, but I think the highest probability for success is when you begin with a well-defined plan, when you have your goals, a strategic plan, and you communicate it throughout the organization, and people understand where you're going. If you have parameters for the sales team for what profitability has to be when they're selling something up front, and if that trickles throughout the organization, I know plans are plans and things can go awry, but if you don't have that plan to begin with, it's hard to meet it. It's just like, you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
that.
So
Yeah.
that's
That's fair.
I'm kind of a stickler for my plans, I guess.
Maybe that's why my my Vistage coach, when I was a member for 12 years, he said, "Mark, what's the most important thing in business?" And he would go, cash, cash, and cash. And maybe because that's my bias towards driving revenue. And actually what I'm hearing here is no matter where your bias is, you have to manage the whole company. And
Yes.
but we all come from one spot. They're all right. They
Yeah.
just have to be properly managed.
Yeah.
Everything is right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That leads
Absolutely.
in. I want to pivot this conversation because at this point, people are now understanding. I get it. Right? I need to be doing this, but there are a lot of executives out there, CEOs, that are saying we're in trouble. I can hear now that our company's not in the best place. What are the next steps? What, maybe they've had a plan in place and they're off the rails, or they've had a snafu in the business due to the economic shifts. Can each of you walk through, when you work with a CEO and they're in that situation, what are the steps to start to get them out of this and getting them looking at each of these areas? Just kind of map out a blueprint for them so they can understand how that works. Who wants to go first? Kirsten, you want to jump? I'll have you jump in.
Okay, sure. So I think it depends on what data they're starting with. If they have their costs and their revenue numbers across all of their programs and services, if they don't, that's where I would start them. So I start individuals with what does it cost to produce one unit or deliver one unit of service? Do you know that? Right? And does that change where you're delivering service? If that's in this state, at this location, in this location, right? Do you know the differences between your delivery costs and your revenue based upon your location or your product or your service, right? Because that's going to tell you how well you're doing, which products or services maybe have a higher or lower profit margin, right? And then those are some of your opportunities. If you're delivering most of your services in your lowest profit margin service area, then that's going to be a kind of an immediate decision-making area, right? I need to shift into my highest profit margin as an immediate, if I can, as an immediate alternative, right? But if you don't know your cost of services and your revenue per service line, per product line, those kinds of things, you can't make those shifts, and you don't necessarily know why you're doing as poorly as you are. So that's one of the first things we might work on.
I love it. Next steps, Mark, I'm going to jump to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just like last month on communication and this month on revenue and profitability, and your last question here, all of us are going to go to the fundamentals. And all of us are going to look at the genius CEO in front of us, and all genius CEOs have weaknesses, and will accentuate the brilliance, and will poke and prod and have them work at the weak areas. And if it's gross margin per product, or if it's products that don't belong in at all, that's the kind of stuff that looks at, and that's fundamental businesses, or fundamental business.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Nora, what about you? What do you think?
I agree with both Kirsten and Mark. I would also, often when things aren't going well, people are nose to the grindstone and working harder, and I don't have time to step away and examine this. We'll have to do that later. I'm going to pull them away, ask them to pull away. We need to clear our head for a moment and look at what's happening and really dig deep. That's the most important thing. Obviously, as Vistage chairs, that's something we talk to people about all the time, is taking time out to work on the business, not in the business. And so a very fundamental, a mental thing to do, but the first place to start, I think.
Love it. And Mike, final thoughts from you on this topic?
Yeah, I must be a psychologist by nature or something. I don't know. I tend to go a different way, in the sense that I draw a mountain for people, and I say, when you're climbing a mountain, a lot of times you get 2/3 up or 3/4 way up the mountain. So you can think of it as your retirement or wherever your next goal is. I said, when you're climbing a mountain, though, you hit a point where it's like really swirling. You can't breathe really well. And so a mountain climber will typically say, hold on, I need to come back down to base camp, recalibrate, rethink about how I'm going to get back to the top again. So I talk to a lot of the business owners and CEOs that I work with, and I use that analogy and say, let's come back down to base camp. Let's go back down to reality where we are today, because it's too hard to make decisions when you're up here. Everything's swirling around. You're dealing with sort of transactional things that are happening. So I said, let's go back down. Let's take a look at the watch and let's start all over again. Or the other analogy is, you're a consultant for this business. You have X amount of years running businesses, and you walked in here. What would you start thinking about and doing? Because more often than not, when they get to that different, trying to get their mindset different is what I spend time on. Because when they get their mindset different, they come to different answers versus they're swirling up here and trying to solve things. So I would spend the time, so let's get back down the mountain, down to base camp. Let's really recalibrate. And starting what an old term I got from years ago was eat what you cook, which is like really understand what in the hell is really going on so you can dive into the business. But you can't do that when you're up here. You got to come back down here and almost start all over again and build up versus going here and trying to figure it out. That'd be where I would start.
Oh my gosh, this was amazing. It went too fast. I'm sorry that we can't answer all the questions we got today. Folks, please jot the names down of these 4 Vistage chairs. They are CEO coaches. They coach entire teams of CEOs on these kinds of challenges, and you can see why based on their answers today. I cannot believe how fast 30 minutes went. I hope that you reach out to our execs. Execs, I cannot wait to have you back next month for our next topic. Until next time, remember what we tell you at Work It Daily, my friends. If you want to win, you've got to work it daily. So stay tuned. Come back and watch another CEO Table Talk soon. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, everybody.